We heard from Mike Brown, Duke Tobin, and Zac Taylor as they weighed in on Joe Burrow's health as the Bengals star quarterback has been cleared for contact.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. And today is the day the Bengals preseason officially begins with leadership meeting with the media before Mock Turtle Soup is served at the Bengals annual media luncheon. We'll break down the biggest stories from ownership, from the head coach, from the GM in reality, Duke Tobin, as they met with the media on Monday. We're going to start, of course, with Joe Burrow's health update. All systems go there. Jamar Chase's extension a priority. There will be some other takeaways we will get to as well in today's episode, sponsored by FanDuel, where they are hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily all summer. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long at FanDuel.com. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Shout out to all of you who make us your first listen and all the Locked On Bengals insiders who get the text updates. You can join that if you're looking for text updates throughout training camp. Join subtext.com/LockedOnBengals. So a lot of shout outs to our regulars today, James, and welcome in to the new folks. One thing we'll also explain, maybe you can explain this, is I got a surprising amount of people today, James, asking me what's the deal with Mock Turtle Soup? Why do we keep talking about Mock Turtle Soup? And just for people who aren't familiar, this is an annual tradition with the Bengals that you've gotten to experience several times now.
Yeah, it is. And it's good. And I don't know why people hate on it. Some of the beat doesn't like it. And that's why some of the beat is wrong, because they don't know what they're missing, or they're just missing out because they barely tried it. But Mock Turtle Soup is an English soup created in the mid-18th century as an imitation of green turtle soup. It's yummy. I don't know how else to describe it. It's really yummy. Go join the Bengals beat, cover the Bengals daily, and get invited next year to check it out. But no, it's an annual thing that is part of the Bengals media luncheon. The origin, I need to ask. I'm sure the powers that be know exactly why it's there. I would bet that Joe Burrow has never had Mock Turtle Soup, though, Jake. And so that's one thing that we should ask him. I think he probably will talk later this week. But the main takeaway, the big takeaway, the thing that going into Mock Turtle Soup Monday that we were all wondering is how much would Zac Taylor and Mike Brown and all of these guys discuss Joe Burrow's health. And Zac didn't pull any punches. He met with the writers. I was talking with Duke Tobin on the camera side of things, met with the writers and instantly said, Joe Burrow's fully cleared for contact, ready to go, and going to be out there on Wednesday. So that alone, we're going to hear from Mike Brown in just a second, but that alone is obviously the best news you could have possibly gotten, I think, if you're a Bengals fan on Monday.
Yeah, and it was expected. This is a timeline that we were hoping for, that he was discussing. Last time we heard from Joe Burrow, the next step was getting cleared for contact. And at that time, the hope was always that he would be cleared for contact before training camp. Not that there's contact for quarterbacks during training camp, but this dovetails into something we'll talk about a little bit later. There is contact in preseason games, and perhaps we'll see Joe in a preseason game this year. But all of the Bengals leadership, from Zac Taylor, Duke Tobin, to Mike Brown, were bullish on Joe Burrow's health. Duke Tobin went so far as to say the wrist is a non-issue at this point. It's a thing of the past, which is a pretty bold thing, I think, for Duke to say. He must feel very confident to be so declarative about the status of Joe Burrow's wrist. There's no bet hedging there. There's no, we're confident about the wrist, let's get through training camp. None of that. It's a thing of the past, projecting a lot of confidence, and Mike Brown seemed to be fairly confident in his quarterback's wrist as well.
Well, I'm not concerned right now. I think he's ready to go. I watched him during the off season, and he looked fine. He could throw accurately. He could throw strongly, far. He could do what he had to do in every way. He's the heart of the team, and we rise and fall on Joe. Everyone knows that. So I feel right now very hopeful because he's ready to go. And if he can do his part, it just makes the whole team rise. We just all do better. The players all do better. Everybody in here does better when he does better. Just the way it is.
Everybody does better when he does better. I think that's true. By the way, when Joe's playing at a high level, I think we're better too. So Joe, go out there and Joe go out there and have a heck of a year. So Mike Brown can be better. The mock turtle soup can be better. Everyone can be better. But you're right. Everybody basically echoing the same sentiment when it came to Joe Burrow's wrist. And yet I think about it, and I asked Zach this, and the video's out there on YouTube, but I asked Zach, like, all right, is it just all systems go? You're just going to practice them every single day? And that's when he dialed it back, like, yeah, we have a plan for the veterans. Didn't say Joe specifically, said veterans. And that's going to be the dynamic, Jake, that we're going to watch day in, day out. When you're here, we're going to watch it. Is it 2 days on, 1 off? Is it 50% of the team snaps one day and then 80% another, and then 100% another day before the a rest day and an off day? How they balance him and use the reps that they have planned for him, I think is going to be really, really interesting, because I would be shocked if it's just straight Joe's going to be out there every day and he's going to take every rep. He may practice every day, but I'm not sure he's going to take every rep. And who knows, maybe he's given off a day here and there, especially before an off day, so you can give him some extra rest. I do think that rest is certainly a priority early in camp for Joe Burrow.
Yeah, ramp up process makes a lot of sense, right? Where perhaps initially it's not every day, it's not every snap, but by the time you get close to preseason game number 3, he's kind of full systems go at that point. All systems go at that point, where he is getting all of the work, because at that point he needs to be ready to play a full NFL game.
All systems Joe.
Sure. I am sure you're the first person to have said that.
I think we've done that probably in each of the past 4 years. So hopefully, cheers to that never happening again.
Yeah.
How about that one?
Yeah, that's like, that one can stay in the past with Joe's wrist and concern over Joe's wrist. I wonder if more people are concerned about Joe Burrow's wrist right now, or if more people are concerned about Joe Burrow's haircut right now. And I say people, not Bengals fans, because I think there are a lot of people who have more interest in Joe Burrow's hair than Joe Burrow's wrist.
He was just jealous of my hair, bro. People on YouTube are going to be like, what hair? No, the hair's there. You got to get the buzz cut, get a little fade. Joe was like, no maintenance. I don't have to play with this little twirl that keeps getting in my eye. Welcome, Joe. Welcome to the club, my man. It's great.
On a football note, just to wrap up the conversation.
You don't want to talk about hair more, Jake?
I don't have anything further on, on the hair. On the football note, though, I do think that watching his rest early in camp will be a topic of interest, and seeing how he ramps up will be a fun thing to watch throughout the early part of training camp. They do, of course, have the 2 joint practices where you would expect Joe Burrow to be a heavy or full participant, as full as you would expect for a starting quarterback at that point. And then something we'll come back to in just a few minutes, because I think it's a little bit more important to talk about what ownership, what leadership had to say about Jamar Chase's extension that we've talked about as well in recent episodes. Is if Burrow's going to play in the preseason, then he needs to be able to practice. And so if he is going to get there, and we'll come back to this topic, that will probably go hand in hand with whatever plan they have for him to get ready throughout training camp. Coming up next, though, like I said, Jamar Chase extension talks were a topic of interest for Duke Tobin, for Mike Brown. We'll get to what Bengals ownership, what Bengals leadership had to say about the Bengals star wide receiver's future with the team, coming up next.
When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the professionals you're looking for. The only thing LinkedIn can't do is help you find the next Jamar Chase, because Jamar Chase doesn't grow on trees, which is why you'll hear Mike Brown talk about him coming up in just a second. But LinkedIn is going to help you find the right professionals in your field. And you're not going to be able to find these professionals anywhere else because 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn, unless you're looking for Jamar Chase. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. 2.5 million. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
The gist when discussing Jamar Chase's future with the Cincinnati Bengals was essentially a matter of when, not if, but a big question as to the when. As Mike Brown and Duke Tobin both emphasized the intent to keep Jamar Chase in Cincinnati, as you would expect. Nothing crazy there. But when Mike Brown, as I mentioned earlier with Duke Tobin's quote about Joe Burrow's wrist, it is so declarative about something and so bold and forthright as to proclaim the priority that is Jamar Chase and extending his future with the team. You know that it is something of significant importance to leadership, to ownership, in this case, when Mike Brown talks about it. And that does leave the question as to when, but certainly a big declaration from Bengals leadership right now that kind of recognizes the reality of they want to get it done and know that it will be a bit of a task to get there, but that they're up for the task.
How hopeful are you that you're able to get a long-term deal done? If it's not this offseason, maybe next offseason with Jamar
Chase? He's a key player. Next to Joe, he's our next one. And he knows it. We know it. This may take a while. We are going to bend over backwards to get it done. I can't tell you when, though.
Really honest, I think, from Mike Brown there. And I enjoyed the session with him because he multiple times talked about how Joe Burrow is the heartbeat, the heart and soul of the franchise. Didn't downplay his importance, which we all know, but still didn't downplay that and didn't downplay it here because we've said it. Joe Burrow 1, Jamar Chase is 1A. And he said it may take a while to get the deal done, which I think, again, I think that both sides, it was something we talked about last week. The vibe I'm getting is like both sides would love to get something done if it worked, but are probably going to be comfortable as well playing this year out if they need to, similar to what happened with Justin Jefferson. And that's kind of the vibe I get here with Mike Brown. He knows that deep down they have to keep Jamar Chase, how valuable he is. You heard him say it. At the same time, when? And I think that's the big question, is the when may not be this offseason. It may not be in training camp. It may not be the Thursday before week 1. Maybe it gets done. But I think that right now the vibe is more looking towards that 2025 offseason is when the Bengals really, not that they're not trying now, but the Bengals and Chase are motivated to get something done.
Yeah, the full quote's out there in addition to what he said in that quote that we just told you about was that included Mike Brown saying...
Well, that's the full quote. That's the full quote. But there's another quote.
There's another quote, I guess, another quote, I should say, where Mike Brown said the offseason is a better time for some of these negotiations. He said, it's not likely that this is a good time to negotiate. The offseason is a better time for that. We try to keep focus on the football part. I'm not going to rule anything out, but I will tell you that the die has probably been cast. He says this in addition to saying that they're going to bend over backward to get it done. And hearing Mike Brown say that is quite interesting to me. This is an ownership group that I've been critical of in the past, James, for their stubbornness about winning the deal and their negotiation valuation stubbornness that they've displayed in the past. And obviously they bend those guidelines for their superstars, for the Jamar Chase level players, for the Joe Burrow level players. We just saw them do it with Joe Burrow. They were always going to extend Joe Burrow. They were always going to extend Jamar Chase. But this seems to me, and I would be interested to go back and look, and I haven't done this, should have done it before we started recording, to see what the language was that Mike used around Joe Burrow versus we are going to bend over backwards to get it done when discussing Jamar Chase, because that feels like a pretty powerful statement from the Bengals owner. Not that it's anything that should surprise anybody, not that this is some groundbreaking thing, but it is a very colorful way to talk about their intention to extend Jamar Chase, which I find to be noteworthy coming from the Bengals ownership group.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what he said last year. Let's see here. I just found a headline. Mike Brown stays mum on the state of contract negotiations with Joe Burrow. Oh, yeah. He said, I've bound myself not to talk about Joe's contract. They don't think it's helpful for the negotiations. The other side has made the same commitment and they have not broken it. That's what it was. They were kind of tight to the vest because honestly, I think he would have said maybe even more than that, because there's one guy that's more valuable than Jamar.
Oh, for sure.
His name is Joe. But it is almost and everyone knows it. So I don't think it really makes them more vulnerable. Like Jamar knows he's valuable. Joe, like the whole organization knows, but to come out and say it like that is interesting. And what I think the message, at least my takeaway here, is the Bengals are saying, look, we want to get it done. We're not debating his value. It might not be this offseason for whatever reason. Jamar may want to play out this offseason too. He might. And the Bengals might, because they might want to see him get to 2,000 yards this year before they pay him $40 million per, or whatever it is. I'm just throwing numbers out there, but it's it does feel like, at least on the Bengals side, that they're hopeful to get something done, but it just might not be this offseason. It could be. Hopefully it's this week. Hopefully it's Wednesday. But the other thing is that quote, just to give a little context about the offseason stuff, that was tied to like there being a deadline, like regular season. Would they be willing to negotiate? Mm-hmm. And I think they're comfortable negotiating with Jamar up until the regular season. I think after that, they would kind of focus on the football, like Mike said.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. But the overwhelming vibe I get from those discussions is that Jamar Chase extension this offseason is increasingly unlikely. And we've talked about from Jamar's side that he is incentivized to wait a little bit. Doing the extension now maybe accelerates a little bit of money for Jamar, but he's going to get a lot of money in the near future anyway. Fifth-year option is essentially equivalent to a franchise tag. It's going to be nearly $22 million for him in that fifth-year option whenever that comes due. The rookie deal for a top 5 pick includes a lot of money as well. Not as much money as he'll make in this extension, obviously, but he can wait if he is so inclined to see if Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb push the receiver market further. Not that they necessarily will really bust the ceiling much more, if at all more, than what Justin Jefferson did, as we discussed. I think it was Friday's episode last week where we talked about extensions that could be coming for this team this offseason. But the vibe to me is that Jamar is still content to wait for that market to be a little bit more developed. He can wait another year if he feels like it. And the Bengals are acknowledging that it might take some time. And when you get that acknowledgement, in addition to the statement that they're willing to bend over backwards to get it done, it certainly seems like it will get done. It's just a question of when. And certainly more powerful language here than you ever heard them use for guys like Jesse Bates or T. Higgins. If this is conjuring up memories of, waiting the extra year for those guys, I don't think that those are comparable situations, just to be abundantly clear about that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because they never – it was like, oh, yeah, we like Jesse. Hopefully we can make it work. We like T. Hopefully we can make it work and find something that works. And
a lot of mentions about pie and salary cap constraints.
Yeah. Mike apparently mentioned pie to the writers. He did not mention it in his session with me when we were doing video. So there you go. Less pie. I will eat some pie. Speaking of pie, maybe you'll have a slice of pie this preseason while you watch the Bengals starters. That's next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports, and football is almost here, and that's why you got to get to FanDuel, because right now, let's say you think that Joe Burrow is going to lead the Bengals to a Super Bowl victory. Well, right now on FanDuel, you can wager on the 2024-25 Super Bowl winner and the AP regular season MVP. Maybe you think Burrow is going to win the MVP, lead the Bengals to a Super Bowl. Right now, it's plus 4,000 with FanDuel. He's behind Patrick Mahomes, plus 2,000, and behind Josh Allen, plus 3,500, tied with CJ Stroud. That one's interesting. CJ Stroud tied with Joe Burrow for those odds. You can get those and so much more right now at FanDuel.com. This summer, by the way, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, whether you're an existing customer or a new customer, with a boost or a bonus daily. So there's something for everyone every single day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer, whether it's NFL futures, whether it's Major League Baseball, all in one spot. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
There's one quick hitter that we should address before we get to the plans to play starters in the preseason.
He got his money. Go ahead.
Which we alluded to yesterday when we posted the episode a little bit early, because at any moment, Amarius Mims could have signed his rookie deal. That was officially announced by the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday. So if you were wringing hands over Amarius Mims being the last rookie to sign his deal, and he was, in fact, the last rookie in the first round to sign his
Bengals.
deal.
Those cheap Bengals.
Yeah, that isn't a thing. The cheap.
No,
that
wasn't a thing. It had nothing to do with it. It's just funny.
I know you're joking, but that's not a thing. There's no wiggle room for draft picks. Those contract values are baked into stone. They can negotiate over some of the details, but the numbers are what they are. That deal is done. Another extension that we will talk about, but probably not today, probably something we'll get to tomorrow, in addition to what the coordinators had to say, as the coordinators had some interesting comments as well during Mock Turtle Soup Monday, the luncheon preceding training camp for the Cincinnati Bengals. Today, as we record this episode, are comments from the coordinators and Evan McPherson, contract extension comments from leadership. But to finish today's show, let's discuss the preseason.
Mm-hmm.
The Cincinnati Bengals in Joe Burrow's time in Cincinnati have not really played the starters in the preseason. There's been a few starters that have played here and there. Joe Burrow has 3 preseason reps to his name back in the Ken Jamar Chase catch an NFL football narrative days. If you remember that, hard to forget if you've been a Bengals fan for longer than 2 years. This year, Zac Taylor, instead of playing coy and talking about, we have a plan, but I'm not going to tell you what the plan is. Taylor, on Mock Turtle Soup Monday, saying, we expect to play our starters in the preseason this year. We expect that Joe Burrow will be part of that. And that would be a big difference. I do think it's something they've planned on doing in the past, but then Joe Burrow's health threw a wrench into things, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But this year, again, being forthright and getting out ahead of it, saying that this is a plan already, speaks to an urgency, perhaps. Not that this didn't exist in the past. Like I said, Joe Burrow's injury history in the preseason has thrown wrenches into the plans, but speaks to the willingness to do things a little bit differently as the team is still looking for that fast start. And that's something that we've talked about throughout this offseason as well.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know how to feel here, because I'm of the belief that you can get plenty of work in these joint practices, and they have 2 this year. And so are starters just not going to participate in one of the joint practices? Are you going to space it out enough? I think that part is interesting, because you can get so much done in those joint practices, much more than in a series or 2 in the preseason. At the same time, I think this is something that the players have told Zac. He's a player's coach. Hey, it would be nice to get out there for a series or 2, and not just Joe. I think there are a lot of guys that would like to get out there, and with the battles that they are working through, right? That we're not going to know who wide receiver 3 is. We're not going to know who the starting corner is. We could see a right tackle battle, and all of these things that we'll probably discuss in some form or fashion on tomorrow's show, as they were all topics today. I do think that it could be good and beneficial for a lot of other guys. Do I think Joe Burrow is going to benefit a ton by throwing 4 or 5 passes in a preseason game? Probably not. but it also might help him mentally coming back from that risk too. So if they choose to do it, I get it. I wouldn't, because I just think the risk is way worse than the reward. But hopefully everything goes well. Hopefully there's a balance between, and I know there's going to be a balance between the joint practices and playing these guys in preseason. And hopefully they strike the right balance and hit the ground running on September 8th when the games really matter.
The interesting thing about playing starters in the preseason, especially when it comes to Joe Burrow, is that I don't know how much it's the on-field reps that really matter. Like, I will not be overreacting if Joe Burrow goes 0 for 5. And I don't think that means anything. If Joe Burrow goes out there, throws 5 passes in the first preseason game that he plays in, maybe it's not the first preseason game, maybe it's the second preseason game, but the first one he plays in, if he doesn't complete a pass, I don't think I care. I think the more important thing for the quarterback in the starting group is to just get those reps of being on a field in a live football situation with the crowd there, getting through your logistics of getting lined up, getting the plays in, all those sorts of things. And then anything you get on top of that from a live rep perspective is a bit of bonus, because like you said, it's going to be minimal. I think I would be surprised, and we'll see, I guess. Maybe they do go out there and play the starters for a half in the way that they did traditionally in the third preseason game 10 years ago, before this trend toward joint practices replacing preseason games really took off. I would be surprised if that's the case. And that being the case, you're getting minimal actual game reps in preseason games. And you're getting way more, like you said, in these joint practices where you can work on the specific things that you want to work on in a controlled environment, blah, 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 blah. Things we've talked about a ton in the past, right?
Blah, 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 blah.
The virtues of joint practices, but there are still some benefits just to going through the motions, going through the experience of getting in and out of the huddle on both sides of the ball before the first regular season game. It's not a ton, but it is something. And I think for a quarterback like Joe Burrow, where we know that he's a guy that really appreciates and flourishes when he gets the reps, and something that we've just missed a little bit too much in the past, I don't think that any rep is a bad thing, assuming that the risk is managed properly.
Yeah, I get it. Look, the other element, and I go back and forth with this, but Tom Brady wanted every single rep he could get, every single preseason snap he could get, wanted to play in all of them. Peyton Manning the same way. Burrow, if the theme of this training camp is let's ramp him up and make sure he's ready to go week 1 and hit the ground running, that doesn't mean you put him in a protective glass and you don't play him. And so I get that. And I think that works, and this preseason thing works as long as the practice plan also works, and bringing him along that way. And so that's how that's what I think is going to be interesting over the next few weeks, because camp is a grind, and it's day after day after day. And maybe you have a meeting day where you're not doing a lot, and then it's day on, and then off, and then on and on and on. So how do they manage that where they're giving him, when he says, "Oh yeah, I'm good to go, let's go," they say, "No, not today, Joe." Yeah. I think that's even more important now that we know that they're going to practice or that they're going to participate in the preseason. That being said, maybe it helps them iron out some of these new faces on offense and certainly on defense, and knowing that you're going to play starters and setting that standard at the start of camp. We're going to play starters in the preseason. Makes it less awkward, less of a thing you're dancing around. And who knows, maybe it changes if some stuff comes up, but I like that if he was going to do it, I like that he said it ahead of camp, was upfront about it, and now we know where expectations are.
You make a great point there that I had forgotten about somehow until you kind of alluded to it. There are more new faces on this team on both sides of the ball than there have been in the Zac Taylor tenure, in terms of like veterans out, veterans in, and overhauling positions. So some of the stability that had existed for this team in personnel is not so present this year. So getting those guys together for just a few more reps in a live football situation also couldn't hurt. Worth noting that we're less than 3 weeks away from the first preseason game. That is going to be August 10th, I believe. I would be a bit surprised if we see the starters in that first preseason game. But the second preseason game is not much longer after that. So we're less than 4 weeks from that second preseason game where we could see some starters play.
What if that's the one that they play?
The first?
You get 2 series in that first preseason game, then you have joint practices in the next 2, and you're done.
That would be, I would be a little surprised. Maybe. I mean, that would be after
I don't know.
like,
I haven't given it a lot of thought, but
that would be after like a week and a half of padded practices.
Yeah.
Ballpark. Will be interesting to watch.
But like Dax Hill, DJ Turner, like the guys on the border, all those guys are playing. So you're talking about like Jamar T. Joe.
Some of the offensive linemen, Joe.
Yeah.
Some of the defensive linemen, like Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, probably don't need to play in that first preseason game. Sheldon Rankin, some of the veterans, I'm not sure. Some of the competition, sure. Some of these guys that might end up being starters that are competing for starting spots, you could see them as early as game 1, but that might not be until game 2 either. I'm not so sure that any of that happens in game 1. It'll be interesting to see. And that's part of, something that we haven't really had to think about since they shortened the preseason is playing starters in the preseason in a shortened preseason and finding the timing for that. Because historically, the first preseason game has been like at most 1 series kind of thing. If I recall correctly, from the 4 preseason game schedule, typically that was 1 series at most. And so will be interesting to see for sure. We'll have more from Bengals Mock Turtle Soup Luncheon Media Day coming to you tomorrow. Evan McPherson's extension we mentioned today. We'll get into a little bit more tomorrow. We've also got comments from the coordinators to get into and their comments on various players that could be in instrumental roles for this team this year. And if you're looking for your second listen, again, shout out the first listeners that make Locked On Bengals their first listen every day. You can check out the 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, also on Amazon Fire TV. There for you 24/7 covering the top sports stories of the day. But until next time, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.